would you call the husband of the Queen?
The king.
There it is, then.
Consort.
That last bit seems unnecessary, don't you think?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to A Cast of Kings, a Decoding TV podcast about the HBO original series House of the Dragon. I'm David Chen, and I think this is why Aegon has got to start smoking those filtered cigarettes. Joining me this week, she is the author of the unofficial guide to Game of Thrones, Kim Renfro.
I did not give you leave to speak my name.
Joining us also, she is the creator of the Jessie Gender YouTube channel and the director of the feature film Identities, now streaming on Nebula, Jessie Earl.
These first few hours are critical, so just leave me to my work, David. I need you to just leave me alone.
Welcome to the podcast. Today on the show, we are going to be discussing Season 2, Episode 5 of House of the Dragon. Let's start with overall thoughts on the episode. Jessie Earl, what did you think of Season 2, Episode 5 of this show?
I liked it. It felt like a good sort of come down from last week's episode. It's a lot less action heavy, a lot more people just talking about the ramifications and events of last episode and dealing with the aftermath of it, which I think is necessary for something that big, and sets the stage for interesting stuff moving forward. And there's some really great scenes here and there. There's a couple things that we'll get into more specifically, but I'm a little bit critical of, but on the whole, I thought this was a solid follow-up.
Kim Renfro, thoughts on the episode?
I loved this one. I thought it was a really good encapsulation of the entire, to me, the success of the way that the writers are adapting Fire and Blood into a television medium and taking advantage of the fact that it's a subjective history with a lot of just sort of loose plot points instead of the very robust internal monologue narrative of the A Song of Ice and Fire books. It's almost like House of the Dragon and Game of Thrones are like little inversions of each other of the way that an adaptation is made. A Song of Ice and Fire is such this is thousands of pages of internal monologue that the show kind of had to distill into shorter plot points that are reached much more quickly and sometimes with a lot less nuance or with a lot less surrounding context, basically. Whereas in House of the Dragon and an episode like this, we get these little plot points like Maelys's head was carted through King's Landing or Aemond was named Prince Regent, and we get all of this amazing context and character motivation around why that happened and why people react to it the way that they do. And so I was pretty delighted throughout this episode because I was seeing so much of that work happening in all of these scenes, and it made it fun to be like, oh, that's where they're going with this, or oh, this is how they're choosing to set this particular plot point up. And I just thought it was a blast.
I'm also a fan of this episode. I agree largely with what Jessie said, which is this is a big come down from last episode. They probably could have chosen to structure this a different way if they wanted to. They probably could have had nonstop action or 2 episodes of war or battles or whatever. But this is a real much calmer episode where, hey, we're just dealing with the consequences of all the stuff that happened last episode. And I really appreciate that it gives time to breathe, develop these characters a little bit more, and move some pieces along. I will say the end of the episode sets up what seems to be a massive plot point that heretofore has not been discussed that much, in my opinion. And I do wish there was a little more setup for that. But we'll get to that. So anyway, I'm also a fan of this one. And there was a handful of really great scenes that we'll talk about. So let's talk about what happens in Season 2, Episode 5 of House of the Dragon. We pick up in the aftermath of the Battle of Rook's Rest. Corlys and Rhaenyra are grieving the death of Rhaenys, while Criston Cole leads the victory parade in King's Landing. The High Tower / Targaryen army comes through the city with the dragon Maelys's severed head on a cart and a box covered in rags that is later revealed to contain the grievously injured King Aegon. So, big reveal, King Aegon is alive. He is grievously wounded, but he is alive. And now we all know that that's the case. He doesn't seem like he's in good shape. It is possible he may still die, but he is alive. And I think it was interesting because I had heard through the grapevine that apparently a lot of recappers concluded that Aegon died from the last episode. And That's only interesting to me because I think a lot of recappers probably have some book knowledge, and so I was like, oh, they fooled a lot of people. Basically, is what I'm trying to say. Like it was at best ambiguous what they did with the end of last week's episode. So
yeah.
Anyway, any thoughts on seeing Meleys paraded through the city? I have to say, it's like I had the same reaction as some of the townspeople, which is that, hey, you think these kind of dragon creatures are ethereal, unstoppable beings, but then seeing one's head like that, it must be a really world-shattering moment. Kim, any thoughts on the scene?
I loved the way that they played this up, exactly for that reason. And not only the bad omen of it all, but the fact that I'm quite sure that this is the only time that most of these people will ever see a dragon that close to them. Like most of these people only ever see them flying in from a distance. It's dangerous to get any closer to a dragon most times, or you're being threatened by one, which is also not a great position to be in. So to see the people kind of shocked in the way that they were, I thought was excellent, because in Fire and Blood, they really, the historian only mentions that everyone was sort of, I think he describes it as like awed into silence. But to me, this was a much more realistic, I think, look at how people would respond. Like the fear that comes with it, the immediate like, guys, like if that's what you just did to her side, like, don't you think Rhaenyra is going to come back and threaten all of us? Like the way that, and they also kind of imply that it was Kristen Cole's idea, or that's sort of what it feels like. I'm like, whose idea was it to display her head like that? Because that's it's no simple feat to saw the head off of a dragon and get it onto a cart. Like someone had to be behind this.
They didn't show that scene where they took like 12 hours with a massive hacksaw to
12 cheeses and 12 bloods sent out to to sever the head of a dragon. But
Kristen Cole is hand to the king, so it's very possible it was his decision, right?
Yeah, and he's kind of been driving a lot of the strategy behind their war efforts so far. And so the way that he's like, why aren't they cheering for us, guys? is great, because it's like, that was a bad call, whoever made that, and you sort of see the comeuppance happen immediately. So yeah, I loved the tone setting that did for this episode, for sure.
Jesse, any thoughts?
Couple things. First off, I love that the head was still smoking. Like it was still like having smoke come out of it, and presumably it must have been several weeks since, or at least a while, because they said Sunfire was long in the dying. They've had to travel back to King's Landing. So I love the small idea of like just dragon heads just smoke for a very long time afterwards.
I thought that too, and then I also thought that it might just be incense, like
maybe
pots. Like I thought I saw the second time I was watching, I thought I saw like an incense pot from one corner, but it looks way more like it is just smoking, and I'm pretty sure that's what everyone's going to think. Upon watching it.
I mean, either if it's the incense thing, that's an interesting idea too. It's like maybe it just smells real bad because it's been decaying for a while.
Like there were like flies like flying around.
Yeah, I like the flies.
The head a little bit.
Yeah, that I did like. The other element of it too is I did like the kind of propaganda aspect of it, with them saying like, "Oh, your king killed this," which we know that he definitely did not. It was Aemon. So it was just interesting to hear the propaganda element of that. And I also just kind of what Kim already said, just like the small folk perspective. This feels, we've had a couple times this season where I've liked the small folk perspective, but sometimes it's felt a little bit like, and here's these random people that we've never talked about before who just appear. This actually feels like a natural way to show their perspective on this thing, and the war. So I did really enjoy that.
By the way, I did get a comment on the YouTube channel from someone named Marshall saying, Dave, you have to stop pronouncing it Aemond and focusing on the D so much. No one thinks we are discussing a maester who lives 200 years in the future and has not been mentioned once in this current show.
Stop focuses on the D, I guess.
To which I say that a lot of the names sound similar in the show. Okay, it's not. Yes, okay. Maester Aemon. I don't want to confuse Aemond with him, but also like Aegon kind of sounds like Aemond if you don't enunciate. And so I just want to make sure we're all clear, because I've gotten the names wrong before. So when I say Aemond, you definitely know who I'm talking about in that situation. There's no question.
I like it because every time it reminds me that Daemon's name is just Aemond, like Aemond if you move the D.
It's the pig Latin version
to
of
the front.
Aemon. Anyway, okay. Next, we see a slow procession of Aegon's makeshift litter as he's brought through the Red Keep and into his room. The maesters get to work examining him, peeling the armor and skin from his body, while Alicent and Aemond watch. He's severely wounded, and the maesters say he could die soon. Alicent goes to Cole to try to find out exactly what happened, but neither he nor Aemond are spilling the beans. Really effective sequence where they're taking the armor off him. It's like, wow, that is rough stuff. Those burns look pretty serious. And of course, like, Kristen Cole still sucks this episode, but you kind of have a little sympathy for him because he has seen some shit, right? Like, he has seen some upsetting stuff this episode. And so when he's cleaning off his blade, it's like, all right, I get it. He's shell-shocked from the horrors of war, and maybe he doesn't want to be super forthcoming of what happened with his lover, right? But anyway, any other thoughts on this before we get to the scene with Alicent in the small council meeting?
Just to say that one shot of the bone resetting.
Ugh.
Oh man. Oh, that got me. Oof.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I appreciated, like, yes, it's gruesome. And as I was watching it, I was like, oh, well, they weren't super explicit about this, but I feel like the only reason why Aegon is still alive and like injured in the way that he is because he was wearing armor made from Valyrian steel, which is a special metal within Westeros that is created using dragonfire, is how like the lore of it goes. And so you can imagine that if he had been in regular armor, he probably just would have actually been burned to a crisp or melted. But it's almost like the armor protected him and kind of like got attached onto his skin a little bit. In the books, they are a little bit more clear about saying that parts of the armor were like fused together with his body and that the maesters couldn't even remove it. I don't know if they're going to eventually say that or not, or if the way that they were showing like how like his skin came up with the armor was them kind of hinting at that little bit of detail of his wound. But
I certainly got that sense. I was like, oh, maybe some of this is still attached to him.
Yeah.
My question is Valyrian steel antimicrobial? Is my question, right? Like, is it prevent sepsis from occurring? You know, that's what I'm curious about.
It's so hot that it disinfects the wounds as
perhaps
they're being created, like cauterizes them as they go.
Yeah.
I also did appreciate that Cole said we lost 900 men, which is exactly the amount said in Fire and Blood that were killed. And also, quick shout to just the detail of Alicent clocking. I think that a big reason why Alicent seems to know that there's something they're not saying is because Aemond now has Viserys' old dagger, the A Song of Ice and Fire blade at his waist. And so that was kind of her first tip off that he must have had something to do with Aegon's injuries, because otherwise why would he suddenly have that knife instead of her other son?
I don't know that necessarily he had something to do with it, but certainly that there's something that is not being told to her about how it all went down, right?
Yeah.
Her and Kristen don't exactly have the most open relationship, unfortunately, which we find out very shortly after, because throughout the rest of the episode, the focus is on Alicent's attempts to stay in control of Team Green, but she's unable to regain her footing now that Aemond has shown his true colors. At the first small council meeting since Rook's rest, it becomes clear that a regent must be appointed. Alicent immediately suggests herself, since she ruled in Viserys' place for years, but the men at the table outvote her and name Aemond the Prince Regent instead. This is a really interesting, cool scene. She kind of almost has like a panic attack afterwards, which I thought was kind of interesting. Like the camera changes so that, or the sound mix changes so that like all the voices become muted, and the camera kind of pushes in on her, and you see that like what has occurred to her is extremely upsetting in some way. And yeah, the show is about the evils of the patriarchy in many ways, and I think like this scene is a great demonstration of that. We get Kristen basically being a coward again, as usual. Classic Kristen. That was kind of my favorite moment. It was like just not that I'm rooting for Kristen or anything, but just like in terms of showing the character when Laris turns to Kristen is like, well, I mean, first of all, I think when Laris betrays Alicent, that's like shocking to her. But then when he turns to Kristen and then Kristen stabs her in the back too, that's when she's kind of like that, like shell shocks her kind of. And I really liked how that all played out. Jesse, any reaction to that?
No, I agree. I think it was really very well handled. Like the whole sequence of her like making her case, and she makes a strong case. Like I've done this before. I know how to do this. I'm the only
one that's done this job before, basically.
Yeah. And they even make the point. I believe it's in this sequence where they're like, "Well, you did it during peacetime, and now it's war." And she's like, "None of you have done it during wartime either, because there hasn't been any." So just like I just love the nonsense that like dudes in a patriarchy will come up with to push women down, whatever, and they make it very explicit in the scene. And I love how this show will talk about how women are treated, but oftentimes not be like, hey, women are treated badly, but then when it is going to be overt, like people calling out like you're a woman, like it would be in the scene, it does come front and center. So I did love the dynamics of that. I also we haven't talked about it much, but I love the little ball things. Cause like Aemon takes his ball and like puts it on his spot in the king's seat. I thought that was kind of fun at that point too. So,
it's cool because they never like explicitly explain how that works, right? So as far as I can recall. But then when he takes the ball and puts it in there's like this big sound design moment of like, you're going to hear this thing and you sense it. You sense like, oh, like this makes it final, like what he's doing. And that's like cool visual storytelling, I think, it's like they don't say what it is. And eventually like you can make sense out of it from the context clues.
Also a lot of good chair placement. Speaking of like, like all like the visual cues going on when Alicent is having her sort of like panic attack moment. I noticed like there's like one empty chair sort of over the corner of her shoulder, which immediately made me think of Otto and like being like, oh, like there's like one less person in the room who might have had her back, but also might have just been another betrayal to her. Because also I find it fascinating that she and everybody else is outright saying like, I ruled for years, like instead of Viserys, right. Whereas like when she was actually doing that and Rhaenyra and Daemon tried to call her out on it, she was like, I don't know what you're talking about. Viserys is king. We are simply doing everything that he wants. Like, but she was only ever able to, sit in that chair, act as Queen Regent, because Otto and all of the other men were allowing her to think that she was in control of the situation, when in fact they were the ones in control, and they were the ones secretly plotting the entire time to crown Aegon regardless of what happened. And it only worked out that Alicent thought in the end Viserys had decided to name Aegon anyways. Like that just kind of conveniently dovetailed with all of the fellas' plans, but they were always going to do that, and they weren't ever going to tell her that that's what was going on. And so I do think it is a super effective moment in showing what happens when women buy into the patriarchy thinking it's going to get them power as well. This is particularly true of white women in our current society. And like Alicent is a stand-in for that idea that like you might trick yourself into thinking you have some sort of agency by being complicit and by being cooperative with the men in the system. And then the second that it's inconvenient for them to let you think that anymore, the rug kind of gets pulled out from under you, and you realize that all of that agency or influence that you believed you had was only ever an illusion. And this is really when it comes to the fore, and especially the contrast of her having that conversation and Rhaenyra having a similar one with her counsel in this scene, because I think it is actually, I think it's Rhaenyra the one who was like, you guys have never, known war. None of these men have known war, except I will say Criston Cole is the only one who has battle experience, which was the reason why Rhaenyra named him to the Kingsguard in the first place. But that was like when he was a teenager, they're basically saying. And so that's also a great character moment, like a character detail from season 1 that adds to the depth of what's going on in this episode with Cole's character, because the fact that he's that shell-shocked, despite in theory being the only one who has actually seen a battle, but he's able to really say like, no, this is a whole different level of warfare that is happening, and I don't think any of us are prepared for it, basically.
Yeah, I really did like you brought it up there, because the thing that struck me too is the comparison to Rhaenyra's council scene, which we'll talk about more later, I'm sure. But like, I did really enjoy that both her and Alicent are just dealing with the same nonsense. Like, presumably Rhaenyra is queen, and yet she's not able to do any of the things that she wants to do because she is a woman, and they see her that way for other reasons that, again, we'll get into some specifics of later. But like, it's really interesting to me that we just have this continual reiteration of, at the end of the day, it's going to be the same system. Like, regardless of who sits in the throne, it's going to be the same nonsense that continues. And so, to a degree, I mean, not that it won't matter. Like, I'm sure someone will be a better ruler than other. I'm Team Black all the way. But like, at the end of the day, it really won't make a huge difference to the people who live under this system.
I didn't notice the empty chair, like Otto's empty chair. Was that was in the scene you're saying?
It's not. It's a chair like back against the wall behind Alicent. It's not like right next to her at the table. But it just, for whatever reason, made me think of the fact that like there are empty chairs here. And just again, like the visual of like Aemon having to like get up from his like lesser chair and like move to like the king's chair. Like, there's just a lot of good chair stuff happening. I'll talk about it again later when we talk about the twins. Like, Jason, his chair is also like another, I think, great. There's just some great setups there that show what's happening with power dynamics in a really great way.
I used to work at Amazon. And there's a lot of when you work at the company, there's a lot of lore in the company that you learn, about like how the company was formed and all this stuff like that. And one of the pieces of lore was that in the early days, when they would have meetings, they would always leave a chair empty at the meeting to symbolize where the customer would sit. And you'd always need to be sitting. You think about the customer. And they should have done the same thing for Otto in this scene. I think. I think it would have gone better. Well, and actually, arguably, their customers are the king's subjects, and if they had left an empty chair for them, maybe Aemon would have made some different choices. Because what happens is he orders the gates of the city closed, and the rat catchers closed to be cut down. But he orders the gates closed because there is massive unrest. People are starving in the city. Alicent starts to tune out, and Aemon chastises Jason for leaving the riverlands unchecked and orders him to urge Jason Lannister's army to move into the area. But yeah, Aemon's first act is suppress the people's will. So I don't think it's going to go well. Alicent decides to privately confront Kristen Cole about his decision to back Aemon instead of her. And I actually like this scene because I just think they have the weirdest relationship where it's not like completely ununderstood. I can understand like the dynamics of this relationship, but it's just like, are they even together at this point? Because he has really stabbed her in the back. I don't know how you kind of come back from this one, but whatever the case, it's a great scene between the two of them. Kim, go ahead. What were you going to say?
Yeah, I was going to say, presumably this is the first time that they've been alone together since he left on his like war campaign weeks ago. And even that was like a frosty goodbye. Like, she like gave him her favor, but like it was like a very weird, they were already having their like weird passive aggressiveness happening. And then now, it's even doubly so. I like that she calls him out being like, what, you're only loyal to me at night in my bedroom. And then like in the daytime, you're just going to pretend like we don't have this like decades long bond, right? Because like they've been in cahoots together since she saved him from dying by suicide way back in season 1. And I love I think I did clock when he calls her Alicent. Like, you don't hear a lot of these characters call each other by first name super often, especially maybe on Team Green. Like, I think that we hear like Daemon, Rhaenyra like back and forth a lot, but Team Green, they seem to stick a lot more to all the formalities of your grace and his grace and et cetera, et cetera. And so the fact that it's like he got to a point where he was trying to really be like, Alicent, like, you don't want to do this. And then her immediately like being like, I did not give you leave to speak my name, and walking away, like kind of like putting him back in his place and putting up that defensiveness again of like, no, there's a hierarchy here, and no matter what's been happening in our personal relationship for years, like I'm going to pull rank on you when I need to. So yeah, I really loved Fabian Frankel's performance throughout this episode. I still don't like Kristen Cole at all, but I do feel like we are finally getting a little bit more depth to why he is the way he is, at least going forward with his experience now at Rook's Rest.
He tries to convince her, like, I was doing you a favor. You don't want none of this. You don't want to be involved in this battle and so on. But it's ultimately not supposed to be for him to decide, right? That's Alicent's issue with it. All right. Couple of other scenes around Team Green this episode. Towards the end of the episode, we get two final ominous scenes. With Team Green, Aemond is standing in the dark and looks at the Iron Throne. Very cool scene. There's a few shots this episode, which was directed by Claire Kilner, that use like a very long telephoto lens, is what I sense, is like that compresses the distance between the subject and the background. And this is one of those scenes where we see Aemond standing in the dark, looking at the Iron Throne. Looks super cool. And Helaena comes in and asks, was it worth the price? Which is a clear sign, I think, that she knows exactly what went down between Aemond and Aegon at the battle last week. We also see Alicent sitting with her hand on Aegon's arm, looking at his half-burned body. She touches his face but doesn't speak, and then walks away. And he quietly says, "Mummy," as she closes the door, which is very, very sad to witness. Jesse, any reaction to this?
I mean, I just thought it was a great scene for Aemond. I mean, I don't have a ton more to say than what you already said about it, but it just symbolically, again, sort of his desire for the throne. And I find that in relationship to Helaena kind of interesting as well, because she's had to deal with a lot of nonsense this season and a lot of loss of family. So just, I think her kind of just being like, well, was it worth it? I know what you did. And I'm kind of just gonna like state it outright. I think kind of fits where she's at mentally, which is kind of interesting.
I thought this was interesting too, because I'm pretty sure they have never spoken to each other in the show so far. They've been in the same room with one another. I'm pretty sure this is their first like intimate exchange of dialogue. And I think they're called Helaemond shippers out there. Because in season 1 with the younger cast of characters, there was a whole scene where Aegon was complaining about how like Helena's so weird and like, why do I have to marry her? And Aemond was like, well, if I were you, I would just do my duty. And like, you know, that's what you're supposed to do. And kind of like implying that like he wishes that he had been firstborn, because he would have found it much easier to just go ahead and, you know, take his place in the family and do his duty and marry Helaena. And there's even theories that like Jaehaerys and Jaehaera are not Aegon's children, that they're actually Aemond's children. Wow. And yeah, it's an interesting, all the siblings have a very interesting dynamic with one another. And I do find that it's fascinating that they're deciding to like bring Helaena in a little bit more in this narrative. Also the fact like was it worth the price? I feel like they're very good at writing these very ambiguous lines for Helaena that could mean and probably do mean a lot of different things. And it immediately reminded me of her predicting that Aemond would have to lose an eye in order to gain a dragon. Like that was one of her first sort of prophetic statements that she made back in season 1. And he specifically referred to it as like a price cost thing after his eye was cut. And he told Alicent specifically, like, don't worry, mother, like, I'll be fine. I have the dragon. Like, it's basically, it was worth that pain to get Vhagar. And so now once again, he's being confronted with the idea of like, is being named Prince Regent, is being this much closer to the Iron Throne worth what you just did to your brother? We'll see.
Well, I'll say he doesn't seem torn up about it at all.
No.
Now, maybe it will have other costs on him that beyond psychological. But so far, I think he's loving life, is my sense.
Everything's coming up Aemond.
Everything's coming up Aemond. Anyway, all right. Well, that's the stuff that happened.
I was just another thought on these final two scenes that I had to rewind and turn on the captions to hear what Aegon said. Like it was such a faint, like mummy. Like I really had to make sure I was paying extra close attention to grab that line of dialogue. And yeah, it was when I was like, oh, like that's what he said. He was just calling for his mom. Like, yikes.
I think when people, and particularly men, are near death, there's this like regression of like they just often they just want their mom, and like and it's interesting to contrast this with the last scene between the two of them where he was very much like posturing and like, why do you think I shouldn't get to make all the decisions here? And she's like, just freaking do nothing. And he's thinking to himself, but I should be able to, I'm the one in charge, and now he's just like, no, I just want my mom. Like, that's all I want, because nothing else really matters at this point. Jesse, what were you going to say?
Oh, the one thing that I did want to say was talking about Aegon's body. I thought he looked rather cleaned up at the end there, because correct me if I'm wrong, Kim, isn't Aegon's body supposed to be like completely burned over in the book? Like he is like completely covered in burns.
Yeah, he definitely was better off than I thought he.
Yeah, and so I figured this was very much a Tyrion moment, where like in the books, Tyrion way back in I think season 2 of the show was supposed to get his nose cut off, but they just gave him the sexy scar in the show.
Right.
So I'm like, this very much feels like we don't want to put this man into all this makeup every single time, so we'll just burn half of his body. And I'm just sitting here being like, I want the ghoul man from Fallout. I want to just look like a ghouly man.
It does say, let's see, I pulled up my Fire and Blood notes. It does say burns that covered half his body. His left arm was the worst. The dragon flame had burned so hot that the king's armor had melted into his flesh, which was what
maybe it is more reflective. I was expecting a big ghouly man from Fallout.
I was at least expecting. Yeah, I was expecting like unrecognizable levels of injury, but they did do it. Was almost like the Two-Face from Dark Knight, kind of like, we'll leave. We'll be able to film half of this very pretty actor's face without CGIing it to death type of vibe.
Yet again, House of the Dragon pulls its punches when it comes to the gore,
Also, interestingly mirrored to the way that Viserys had sort of rotted away on only half his face by the end. Like, I think if I'm getting my lefts and rights right, Aegon's injuries are like mirrored to the way that Viserys looked towards the end of his life. So, hey, daddy issues and mommy issues coming to the fore.
Indeed. All right. Well, anyway, those are some thoughts on what's going on with Team Green this episode. All right, let's talk about what's going on with Team Black. Rhaenyra's offensive capabilities are worse than ever, as reflected by her grumpy small council. Throughout the episode, she and her son Jace set new plans in motion to help get Team Black an army, more dragon riders, and the favor of the small folk on their side. So we see like her conflicts with the small council. She's working really hard to win their trust, having a lot of difficulty. Both of you were talking about how this kind of mirrors the scene that Alicent had earlier. Any other thoughts on that you want to share at this point?
I just fully ground my teeth at the phrase "the gentler sex" when that came up in her council scene. I was just like, we're really just saying this out loud. But of course they are. And this notion that it's not your fault. It's simply that you're a woman and therefore couldn't possibly have understood or ever learned about the intricacies of warfare. And then we already talked about her great comeback to that of being like, you dumb butts also haven't been in war. What are you talking about? We have the same resources at our fingertips here to figure this out. And also there's a more effective way to actually strategize about this instead of you telling me constantly that I'm not suited to make these types of decisions.
And also the fact that Rhaenys is the one who sacrificed herself this episode. She was the one who died, our last episode. She's the woman who died for all of them. Done more in fighting than any of these assholes. Totally.
I also, the mention by one of them too, I caught of saying Vhagar's depleted and therefore there's a window of time here. And I was like, a little more dragon lore tidbits for us, implying that the dragons don't have continuous ability to blast fire on their enemies. like they need to recharge their internal combustion systems between between battles. So
they need to eat like 1,000 sheep per every 5 seconds of dragon fire breathing, right?
Yeah,
or something
it's a calorie depletion thing.
Yeah.
As someone who's currently on the like, how do I produce more breast milk? Oh, it's just by eating a lot of food and drinking a lot. I'm like, oh, I am a dragon who just
yes, you
needs to recharge between feeds and then go back into battle with my newborn.
Jace takes it upon himself to go to the Twins, which is this big, important crossing in Westeros. What is the significance of the Twins? Kim?
Yeah. So the Twins is a very strategically located castle that it spans the Green Fork, which is one of 3 major rivers that are basically kind of smack in the center nook of Westeros. Just envision, England. A lot of people have pointed out that Westeros is effectively like England and the UK and Northern Ireland, but inverted in some ways. And the Twins sort of sits very conveniently at about the halfway point between the north and the south. And River Run is to... I'm like, God, I'm going to get my east and west mixed up. River Run is to the west of the Green Fork, like where the Twins are. And the Stark army is going to be coming down on the east side. And so instead of having to continue going all the way along the east side of the Green Fork River and then eventually cut over around where Harrenhal is to get up to River Run, Jace is saying if we just get the phrase to let the army cross right at the Twins, it's like a shortcut straight to where River Run is, and then they'll be able to defend that area. Because as we heard while Alicent was sort of having her panic attack earlier in the Small Council, Tywin Lannister is over to the west and is trying to get his army to march to the Riverlands as soon as possible to take River Run. And so basically Jace is trying to get there first. And it's interesting that this comes up as a strategy here because this was a big pivotal point in Game of Thrones, if you'll remember, with Robb Stark had similar needs of needing to get his Stark army south in the fastest, most strategic way possible.
And it was smooth sailing for him, if I recall correctly.
Nothing went wrong there.
Fine.
Yeah, but anyway, Jace wants the Stark army to be able to get right into the Riverlands instead of marching down the other side of the Green Fork. And he convinces the Freys to bend the knee and allow the Stark army to cross at the Twins so they can reach River Run faster, at the cost of giving up Harrenhal, I believe, right? I have to say, watching this, my reaction was that Jace was overstepping because that's just what we've seen from people like Daemon. Like, I think Daemon's like overstepping beyond what Rhaenyra wanted. So I was configured to think, oh, Jace is going to go beyond like what he's supposed to do. But then at the end of the episode, Rhaenyra compliments him. So I think she's actually happy with this development, right? But anyway, any other thoughts on this sequence, Kim? Yeah.
I thought he did well. Like, I think that, yes, he was acting without her leave, but not in the way that Daemon was. Like, he was still acting in her interest. And I think that he did a pretty good job. Again, great chair placement details here of like, you could tell that like he's younger, he's in like a lower seated chair. He might have looked very undignified there at the other side of the table, but like he really managed to hold his own. And like even the move of like finishing his wine and standing up and then like, making the Lady Frey serve him and then saying like, oh, you want Harrenhal? Like, let's toast to you guys having Harrenhal. That's fine. I thought it was working out pretty smoothly in the moment because it's true that Harrenhal right now, is like the previous Lord of Harrenhal was Larys. He, I guess, technically is, but like the fact that Daemon has claimed this castle, Daemon isn't trying to say I'm the Lord of Harrenhal. Daemon's trying to say I'm king of Westeros. I roll. We'll get to that later. And so it is true that there's Team Green or Team Black does need to assign some lord to all of these castles in the end. And so like it's up for grabs. Freys are the first ones to ask for it in all of these treaties. like, sure, if that's what they want. Also, the fact that Harrenhal's like mega cursed, bro. Like, no one really wants it anyways, or it's like it doesn't feel like you're really giving like the jewel of the kingdom up necessarily. Like the castle's in disrepair. Yes, it's great location, but like needs a lot of renovations. So yeah,
I did like we cut. I think we'll get to the scene later on because we're splitting it up differently. But we cut from that scene to like Daemon like working in Harrenhal and fixing it up, and you see how kind of decrepit it is. So I did like that. I also I want to reiterate too. I really like Jace. We haven't talked about him much, but kind of like Aegon. Jace is not that Jace wasn't like a good guy in last season, but he's gotten a lot more character in his sort of limited roles this season. He hasn't had as much to do, but I've loved a lot of what he's gotten to do, and he's shown himself to be like kind of an abled leader, and like hot-headed, not hot-headed. Sorry. Getting angry appropriately, but being willing to be like cooled down, like when he got angry at his mom.
I think passionate
earlier.
is the word you're looking for.
Yeah,
Jesse?
passionate. That's the word. I speak words good. But yeah, no, he seems like he's a good kid. He's a good egg, I think.
Yeah. I would agree. I guess basically like everything I've seen is people don't respect Rhaenyra. They're going beyond what they're supposed to be doing. They're often disobeying her, and so I just thought, oh, this is another example of that. But turns out it wasn't. That's why I was temporarily confused.
I mean, there also could be. I mean, there is there. It's not that. I mean, at one point earlier on in the scene, is like, I'm not going to tell her. I'm just going to do it.
And he says, I'm just going to do it. Right. So I'm like, oh, this is going to go wrong in some other way for her. But turns out she's happy with it. Anyway, Rhaenyra and Mysaria talk about how her small council disrespects her. And they send her servant Elinda to King's Landing on a secret mission. Now, my understanding is like they don't explicitly say what the mission is, but they're basically like they're going to use whispers to turn the small folk against Aegon and Team Green. That's my perception of what so far. We don't know the details of how exactly they're going to do that, and I don't think they'll reveal this episode, but that's it. Anyway. Rhaenyra also sends Baela to speak with Corlys on her behalf and offer him the position of Hand of the Queen. And Corlys is really not cool with this. Hand of the Queen / Kings is like one of the worst jobs in Westeros, it seems. And Corlys seems to understand this and is really upset because he's like, haven't we given enough? And there's a nice moment when Baela essentially says, hey, like Rhaenys died doing what she loved. And also that's how I want to die, right? And that seems to earn Corlys's respect and understanding a little bit. So I thought that was a neat kind of scene and kind of seems to win Corlys over a bit, right? Kim, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I love this moment. I love that we're getting to spend more time with Baela and Rhaena in their like on their own, kind of outside of just like their betrothed or just Rhaenyra. I appreciate that we're actually seeing how they are able to advocate for themselves and for Rhaenyra. And I think that they're both very good at it. I think like Baela, Rhaena, and Jace are like absolutely clearly this like some of like the strongest politicians, like burgeoning politicians underneath Rhaenyra in their ability to sort of stand their ground, state what they have to offer, what they might be able to get in exchange, convince people to, join their cause or continue on their cause. So yeah, I love this scene.
Indeed. Okay. I think there's just one or two other things to discuss with regards to Team Black this episode. Rhaenyra asks Sir Alfred to go to Harrenhal to convince Daemon to get his shit together when it comes to supporting her claim and raising an army. I thought that was a nice scene as well of like they have this kind of understanding of, hey, you and I don't really like each other, but at the end of the day, I know you're not going to betray me, so please do this thing for me. And that was nice. And then, of course, the final scene of the episode, Rhaenyra and Jace talk in the middle of the night about how to gain an advantage. And she's been reading the history books about Visenya, Vhagar's first rider, and Aegon the Conqueror's fellow fighter and sister wife. And they're essentially, Rhaenyra is getting really frustrated that they've lost a dragon, and also they have multiple dragons that don't have riders. And if they just had riders, boy, would they have a much easier time in this situation. And Jace points out, hey, there have been lots of like bastard children over the course of the years. Perhaps one of them could be a rider. I'm only half, Targaryen in the first place, and you've seen me ride things. And so, the camera pulls out to reveal, hey, there's scrolls and scrolls of potentially bastard children who might be able to ride these dragons, and presumably they're going to help to find somebody who can do this. Cool idea. I wish it had been set up like a little bit earlier, like theoretically there's these dragons, Vermithor and so on, like underneath, like no one's even really mentioned it. Hey, like there's these 2 dragons just kind of going rogue. Just kind of doing their own thing for the last 4 or 5 episodes this whole time. I think they've mentioned it once, maybe, but like,
didn't they appear? They appeared in the finale of season 1, right? Didn't Daemon go down and see them? Did I make that up?
Daemon did visit one.
Yeah.
Yes, that was the one he was like singing a song to him.
Right, Vermithor. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Silver Wings is the other one. And then Daemon like mentioned offhandedly in also like the season 1 finale being like, we have more dragons than them. We even have dragons without riders. But like, that, like, never to be mentioned again until season 2, episode 5, when we're going to introduce the dragons without riders plot. Like,
I just wish it had been, I just wish I had seen in like a couple more mentions of it this season, because it's clearly, I think, going to be a big.
Yeah.
The fact that it ends on this is going to be a big plot point. But yeah, Jesse, what'd you think of this final sequence of events here?
I loved this scene a lot. Like, I agree with you. I do think that what I think more is that it could have used a good reiteration of them in this season, because I do feel like we have seen them. But again, I'm more aware of them than others that have read the book. But I also did, speaking of setup though, I did really like the setup of this room, because we've been in this room before of like seeing all these scrolls, and I've just thought it's been like an interesting just room design that they just had with all the scrolls in the wall, and this being a library. But now it's like, oh, the information is here the whole time. And so I just like this. It's kind of like a recurring theme that comes up in George R. R. Martin's stories of just like like having to glean information through history and like do research. Like we had Sam figuring out stuff in Game of Thrones, the show itself. We talked earlier about the prophecy.
Ned figuring out the Targaryen or Lannister hair thing.
Yep. We even talked earlier about the prophecy stuff.
Right.
So like it's a recurring theme in there that I really did enjoy. And then also there's a line too that Kim pointed out in the notes, but I noticed as well when we were watching, where it was Jay sort of has this like written to gild us into glory line, sort of a poke at history, which I thought was a really cool commentary again on just the way that the show itself is in conversation with the Fire and Blood book, and how the Fire and Blood book is often sort of the glorious the sort of sanitized version of history versus what actually happened and what we're seeing in the show. And so I get, again, I like that this show constantly has a both metatextual and literal conversation with how history is written and who gets to be written. It's even something too I was thinking about saying earlier when we were talking about Alicent, where she's sort of like her contribution to being queen and ruling is sort of erased and given to Viserys, even though he was dying at the time. Like her contribution as a woman was erased and pulled from history. So yeah, just a constant conversation with how we tell the story of history in this show. So I liked that as sort of like, it's coming to the fore here in this. So like that.
Totally. Even on that point of Alicent in Fire and Blood, they say that it's Alicent who orders the gates of King's Landing closed.
So it's like it's the woman who did the shitty thing.
Because like seems like that wasn't a great idea, but like, the history books are gonna not put that blame on the new Prince Regent. They're gonna say that it was the Dowager Queen who did it. Yeah.
Blame women for all the bad shit and give all the cool shit to the men. See that.
Another neat detail too was like the way that it looks like Valyrian is a top to bottom written language. I feel like I clocked that. I feel like this is one of the first times that like we've seen like a full book with that written out, which I just think is cool. Like the amount of detail that David J. Peterson, the conlang expert who has helped create all the languages for the show, like the way that they have really truly made this a like readable and speakable language, I think is so neat. And it was cool seeing it in that book that way.
Yeah, you just get an appreciation of how much detail goes into the production design of the show and all the people who make the props and the sets and so on, and
how many legs they put on dragons.
How many legs they put on dragons? But every time like they do this in this episode, they have like tons of close-ups and focus pulls to these scrolls, and it's like I think the scrolls were there the whole time, right? Like we've seen the scrolls before, and so somebody like handcrafted every single one of those freaking
Mhm.
things and like rolled it up exactly as it, and if there was no moment this episode, you would never have even noticed it. And it's just like every time there's a close up of something like that or like a little background detail revealed, I always hope like whoever helped make that got a little joy out of seeing that emphasized in the show. Anyway, that's some of the stuff that happened with Team Black this episode. All right. There's a bunch of stuff that happened with Daemon this episode. Daemon still ghosting Rhaenyra's council and has started saying he is effectively the rightful king. But his attempts at wresting control keep failing. Not only is he still having strange visions and dreams that weave into his daylight activities, but the way he recruited the Blackwoods into doing war crimes instantly backfires with the other lords and ladies of the area. So he tries to recruit the Brackens, I think, using the Blackwoods, and he essentially gives them leave to do war crimes and kill and murder and rape and pillage, and people are not cool with that at all. And there's a scene where he's essentially going to nuke the Brackens, right? Like he's essentially about to torch the Brackens, and he's like, you know what? I can't kill them all because I actually need their help. So I would rather commit these atrocities in the hopes that maybe they'll join me because then at least I'm netting out positive. Even if they hate me and they're on my side, I'm netting out positive as opposed to if I just kill them, I got nothing. I got nothing to show for it. That is the logic, at least. But it quickly starts to go wrong. Kim Renfro, thoughts on this?
Bad plan, my guy. Like, I was pretty surprised. Like, at first they cut away from Caraxi, like that really cool shot of like
that shot was amazing.
Yeah, like the Brackens like turn their backs, being like, "You can kill us, and we won't even look you in the eye when you do it." And I was like, "Oh, like what a way to go out."
Yeah.
And then they cut from the scene.
They cut away, and it's like, "Oh, we didn't get to see them torch. That sucks."
I was like, it's a big CGI budget this season, a lot of dragon fighting. It's like, if we needed to save one, fine. But then it quickly becomes clear that Daemon just decided not to do it. And I was like, that to me is a weird, like, undercutting of your own assertions of power. Like, you can't threaten to burn someone if they don't do something and then just immediately be like, fine, like, I'll let you live. Like, I don't know. Like, yes, he does send war crime.
Well, remind me never to get threatened to be burned by you, Kim. My reaction
because I will do it. You got to follow through
yes.
with your boundaries, man. He set a boundary and then immediately, went back on it, and it clearly, came back to bite him very fast. And I think, like, my understanding is that later when we see him chopping wood and we like hear those like screams, like the sort of like echoey, creepy screams, that like he's hearing those war crimes being carried out on the wind. And then he has this whole mysterious conversation with Alice where she basically says, like, yeah, I know what's happening, not because someone came and gave us the news, but because I hear the wind. And like every time I keep, that scene from True Detective where Woody Harrelson's character says to Matthew McConaughey's character, like, I just wish you would stop saying odd shit. Like, I feel like that's all Daemon is ever thinking when Alice like tries to get all like woohoo with him. But yeah, it's clearly like just like his whole assassinate a son for a son mission went awry, and that is clearly haunting him. It feels like this choice to not simply follow through with burning the Brackens and moving on with continuing to try to recruit people to his cause, the choice to go about it in this like shadowy, much more awful way immediately had repercussions.
Yeah. Not exactly the master tactician we might have thought he was. Jessie Earl, any reaction?
I mean, this was the sort of criticisms that I was alluding to earlier on in my overall thoughts. I'm not super invested in this Daemon storyline. I think it's the weakest. It's just sort of him. It feels like they don't exactly know what to do with him as much. So they're giving him this sort of like flailing about for power, sort of impotent, emasculated storyline, which fits his character. His character has always been about emasculation and how he handles that fairly poorly. But it just ultimately feels very reiterative over and over and over again, and feels to go against kind of who he is. Like, Daemon Daemon is not really somebody to pull away from violence. I even think back way to season 1 where he like killed his wife to get free of her. So he's not really, I don't know. It just feels weird to have, as Kim said, him be like, I will murder you all, and then pull back from that and then have this war crimes thing that he does with the little folk. And then also like, while I think it's cool to kind of play with this Alice stuff of like, I heard it on the wind and that's kind of creepy and ethereal. I do kind of like that stuff. It's weird to not show that. I mean, not that I want to see like war crimes being enacted, but it's just like, it feels like a weird choice for the show to not show us these crimes being enacted and show the horrors of what Daemon's doing. It's just a strange choice. Again, it's not something I would need to see the trauma of, but it's just strange. So just
it's weird that it's not represented in any. You don't need to show them happening, but it's weird that it's not represented visually in any way. Like show people like storming into a village and you don't see what happens, but like at least show something. But it's just we just hear it secondhand from Alice and stuff, right?
So it's like the horror of what Daemon's doing is lessened by us not seeing it. So it's like you're already doing this weird storyline with Daemon, which seems inconsistent with his character, and then you're making him do these horrible things and then lessening the impact on it on us as the audience. So just I don't know, the way that this storyline is told is frustrating and just feels like A, they don't know what to do with Daemon, and 2, feels like they want to constantly reiterate, hey look, Alice is weird, she's a weird witch lady, isn't that strange? And just kind of hitting those beats over and over and over again. It's getting a little frustrating for me.
I think the only thing that sort of saved it for me this episode was the fact that at least he's now being more overt about being like, no, call me king. Mm-hmm. And like Rhaenyra can join me if she wants, but like we're back to me thinking that I'm the rightful heir. And I'm like, okay, at least he's like saying those things out loud now, instead of us being in the slightly more like ambiguous, like, okay, he's not responding to any of their messages, but like, is he still kind of ultimately going to be loyal to her?
Can I ask you both, like, do you feel that journey has been adequately depicted on the show? Because I feel like what I remember from House of the Dragon season 1 is like, oh, they are like, you know, they are on the same side. You know, they are like gonna face the future together. Rhaenyra and Daemon, they're awesome. Yes, they had some ups and downs, like finding each other between like that dude that she had kids with and him caving his wife's head in with a rock. But like, you know, they got through all that. And now they're finally together and on the same side. And then that's literally what I remember from season 1, right? Like that's what I came away from season 1 feeling. And then in season 2, they have this big argument where he's like, I don't respect you. And then now episode 5, he's saying, hey, actually, I'm the king now. And I'm like, okay, did I you know, I know Daemon's like impulsive and wants power. Like I get that from season 1, but did I miss parts of the journey, or was there a part of the journey that wasn't in the show? You know, like what do you make of his journey towards, I am now the King Regent, and by the way, you can leave out the Regent part, you know?
My feeling on it is I agree with you. That was kind of the journey in season 1. I did really like the scene between him and Rhaenyra because it brought to the fore a lot of things that were implicit in season 1, which is the fact that like Daemon literally groomed her. And he was the one who had power in a lot of those sequences with her. And so I like that was brought forward. And honestly, I feel like that could have been a much more interesting through line for his character and their relationship throughout the season, to being like, hey, we were together, we were like this at the end of season 1, and now because we're sort of like having to work together on this, these tensions come out. I think that would have been an interesting way to go. But
if you're watching the YouTube at decodingtv.com/ or youtube.com/ at decodingtv, both me and Jessie are holding up our fingers crossed to each other.
Yeah, like they showing were like this,
they're tight. They're tight, you know? Daemon and Rhaenyra are tight. Anyway, okay, go ahead.
But then and I think that this is just a kind of adaptational problem because the show wants to tie so tightly into like this being a literalization of what the book history is. The book history, this isn't like too much of a thing that requires its own like bonus episode, but it's more just like we know that Daemon went and claimed Harrenhal at this time, and he doesn't have like a ton going on plot wise at that point in the book. There's other stuff that comes, but most of the time it's just like he's at Harrenhal raising up an army. And so it feels like the show's like, oh, well, we want to kind of draw out this tension between him and Rhaenyra, but we have to do it with him being very clearly separate from her timeline wise. And so this is kind of the sort of backtracked sort of like storyline that they had to come up with based on just location differences. When the more interesting storyline, I think, would have been to kind of have him and Rhaenyra together working this shit out or pulling each other apart because of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Kim, any thoughts on Daemon's journey from, hey, I'm supporting Rhaenyra, my wife and queen, to I am the captain now? You know, like what are your thoughts on that?
I think the turning point that we haven't discussed is the moment in the season 1 finale when she starts talking again about the prophecy that the show is making a lot of efforts to emphasize and realizes that he doesn't know about it because Viserys never really intended for him to be heir. And he freaks out and chokes her. And like that is the first time that he is physically abusive to her.
I see. Okay, got it.
And that to me was like a pretty big like, oh, we're not doing like, yeah, this is a weird relationship, but like, you know, they're tight. This is cool.
Yeah,
like,
I forgot about that.
That's fair. Yeah. That's great point. And I hadn't recalled that, but you know.
Yeah. But like, I do think that it would have been more effective for us to have more scenes with them in conflict in the same place.
Yeah.
Like building to this. Like even the fact that like when Sir Alfred asks Rhaenyra, like, do you want me to send him a message? And she just says like, I would like for us to continue our conversation. And I was like, okay, like, was there more to be said in that? I felt like they did kind of hash a lot of things out. And yeah, he sort of seemed to storm out without concluding the discussion. But yeah, it is.
That was a little weak, I have to say, when she's like, I'd like to continue our conversation. It's like, that's it? You don't want to.
Right.
You know, like that you're sending a dude all the way there to just say that, you know, that I was a little disappointed by that, but yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It is interesting. I think with all the talk of men and their role in either supporting or not the women throughout this story, I do think that Daemon is like the most interesting to me in the way that he does seem the most conflicted about whether he wants to do the quote unquote right thing or like be the better guy in situations versus like completely charting his own path and only acting within his self-interest. Like the way that Laena appears to him in this episode and then says like, have you been looking after our girls? And he seems very affected by being like, oh, like, nope. I pretty much abandoned my children and my wife and my other children. And like, it's all coming, you know, it's all coming to the front now. Like, I do appreciate actually getting to see a man need to wrestle with that. And I like, again, I think that I just like the magic elements of A Song of Ice and Fire really tickle me. And the fact that like, yes, it does seem like they're just kind of using Daemon to bring out a lot of those aspects of the story. And Alice is a little bit heavy-handed with like, I'm a witch and I'm weird, but like I think it's fun. Like
I don't mind it. It's more like I love that creepy element of the story too. Like that stuff. I always love the creepy like magic stuff whenever it comes up, especially when it has that tinge of horror to it, which this does as well. But I think my issue with it is more just it's reiterative and taking its time. Yeah. Like I feel like this journey of Daemon kind of getting to this point of like, I'm king, and like having again that sort of toxic masculinity, emasculization, I need to assert my dominance stuff. It's kind of all he's had for 3 episodes against characters who aren't really that interesting. Like there's the guy who runs Harrenhal and like some of the Riverlands folks, but they're not super sketched out or interesting characters. So it's just sort of like this, like he's emasculated. Oh, look, he's still emasculated. Oh, look, there's creepy stuff here. Oh, look, there's creepy stuff here. And he's emasculated. He's having a dream sequence. There's another dream sequence. It's kind of
he's having sex with his mom.
Yeah. Right. It's like, it's repeated beats. And I feel like if this had been over the course of like an episode or maybe even 2, it'd be fine. But it's like this is like the 3rd episode where that's been the case. Yeah. And it seems like there might be a 4th of still that. That's the problem.
Right. Well, let's talk about that for a moment, because he does have this weird sex dream with this other blonde woman, and a lot of confusion in my household about who exactly that was. But it does appear that it was his mother, right? Like at first I thought it was Viserys's wife, right?
Yeah, I thought so
Yeah.
too for a second.
Yeah. Which would have been his sister-in-law, I guess. But it was actually his mother, and he kind of has this fantasy of his mother wishing he came out of her womb first rather than Viserys, right? Because that would make him the rightful king. So, yeah.
Everyone's got mommy issues. It's
second son trauma, really hammering it home with an Oedipal complex.
We have discussed how this show has done a good job of making Harrenhal seem pretty unpleasant. I do think it's like quite different in the day than at night. At night, it's like, wow, that's miserable. But during the day, it's like, hey, there's sun that sometimes peeks in here and kind of nice. And he's working on it, chopping some wood and getting this place back in order. But
I'm glad that Alice called him out. That again, maybe a little bit of lampshading with what are you doing? Why are you just chopping wood? Dude? You have nothing better to do, Mr. I'm the king and I'm so important and I have a dragon, but no, I'm really gonna roll up my sleeves and chop some wood.
You gotta show he's a man of the people.
I was going to say is that there's nothing more manly than getting out there and chopping wood,
Yeah.
Sure. I also love the shot after he's talking with Alice when Sir Simon comes to give him the news and she just kind of vanishes behind him in a way that makes me be like, was she ever there? I thought it was a cool bit of camera work with playing on both Daemon and the audience's
Have we
paranoias.
ever seen Alice interact with any other characters on the show?
No, I don't even think we have.
Yeah, she's always just kind of mysteriously passing by or standing near.
Yeah.
I also love the shout out of the hour of the wolf is refers to a time in the middle of the night. There are different, it's hour of the owl, hour of the whatever, hour of the wolf is a specific time of night. Don't ask me exactly what time right now, but it's also it's a phrase used by George R. R. Martin in Fire and Blood to refer to a time when House Stark comes into a little bit more power as well. A time for wolves and the hour of the wolf, just nice little George R. R. Martinisms sprinkled throughout this episode.
But yeah, the last scene happens when Daemon is woken up by Sir Simon because the River Lords come in the middle of the night to denounce his war tactics. All these men have stormed in and raped and burned and pillaged, and they've destroyed septs and done basically all kinds of terrible things. And they do not respect Daemon's rule. His stint as king in his own mind is going badly already. Essentially,
his imagined rule has already failed.
Yeah.
Way to go, buddy.
All right, a couple quick things I want to mention before we close off here. There is one scene with Rhaena arriving at the Eyrie, and Lady Arryn is not happy that they brought small dragons instead of big ones. She's like, all we promised you was dragon. We didn't say the size of them. We didn't say that they would be ready to fight. But it's nice to see the Eyrie again. It's cool to see the Eyrie. And then there was also a scene earlier that I wanted to mention where Corlys tries to make Baela his heir, but she declines. Right? She says she is of blood and fire, and the heir to Driftmark must be a salt and sea. How should we interpret these words, Jesse? Any thoughts on this?
Oh, I really thought that was just a cool nod to people's temperament because technically she
has a claim, right?
Yeah, she has a claim to both houses. But she sort of is like, no, I see myself as more aligned with the Targaryen side of my lineage, which I just thought was I don't know. I just thought it was a cool sort of just thinking about how you align with your house, what they mean to you, what those words mean to you in a world like this. Because we've gotten in Game of Thrones a bunch, people using those words this is who defines us, this is what our house is. I think about I'm bowed, I'm bent and broken, that sort of stuff. And I think just a character kind of having the ability to choose that and thinking what that means for her, especially a woman character, and kind of denying even theoretically access to more power because it's just not who she sees herself as. She wants to die in Dragonfire. I don't know. It was just a cool sense of agency that even in that scene she evoked too of like, I want to die by Dragonfire. My mom chose to die by Dragonfire.
Right.
Rhaenys chose to die by Dragonfire. Yeah. It's just an interesting sort of reiteration of women, especially women aligned with Corlys, having this sense of agency and control over their own definition and identity. I just really liked.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I do like it's the way that the inversion of fire and blood and fire happen. I also love, but yeah, fire and blood are the house words of House Targaryen, which going back to like, you know, poor Dany not knowing how to hatch dragons, etc. Like I remember seeing like the pretty solid fan theory / analysis being like, did anyone notice that House Targaryen's words are a recipe? Like you need fire and blood to hatch your dragon. But I mean, we also we haven't seen any dragons hatched specifically in House of the Dragon yet.
I think so.
But yeah, I really loved that moment for Baela for sure.
I'm just gonna say, like, Corlys seems like the best dude towards the women in his life. Like, even cheating on Rhaenys and having bastard kids, that's implied. It seems like Rhaenys is kind of chill with it, and they're like, you know what, it's open relationship.
Maybe they have an open relationship. Maybe they had an understanding. You know?
Yeah. So I just like like I feel like, you know, Corlys seems like a pretty chill dude for living in a patriarchy. So.
I just realized I didn't shout out one more tiny detail, which was when we saw Alinda sent on the mission to King's Landing, the woman who opened the door for her was Diana, the serving girl again, the same one from who was assaulted by Aegon. We saw got demoted down to having to be a serving girl in a tavern, but apparently she's also been within Mysaria's spy network this whole time, and I thought that was really cool. I definitely wasn't ever expecting to see her after that season 1 scene, and then I thought seeing her in that tavern a couple episodes ago was just like one more little like tip off to, you know, remind us of Aegon's nature, remind us of what happens to young women among the small folk. And then I was like, ooh, like we brought her back, so I'm excited to see Diana and Alinda see whatever they're up to in the next episode.
Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.